Organizations and people. When we discuss the concept of an organization inside of ITIL 4, the organization is not limited to a service provider organization, or an internal information technology organization, or even an information technology organization at large. Instead, we're just looking at this as a generic organization. But what exactly is an organization anyway? Well, ITIL 4 defines an organization as a person or a group of people that has its own functions with responsibilities, authorities, and relationships to achieve its objectives. Notice this definition is pretty generic, and again, this is done on purpose by the creators of ITIL because it allows ITIL to be more widely used and adapted to any organization. In ITIL 4, there are two basic roles that an organization can fulfill. A service provider is a role performed by an organization in a service relationship to provide services to consumers. Conversely, a consumer is a role performed by an organization in the relationship that uses or consumes those services. Organizations vary in size and complexity as well. Now, organizations can also vary in their legal structure in that they can be a single person, a team, or even a complex multinational corporation. What really bounds an organization together is a set of common objectives, relationships, and authorities. Now, this may seem strange, especially when considering a single person that can act as an organization, but it really does work this way in the real world. When I created my company, Dion Training Solutions, it was created as a sole proprietorship originally. I was a single person operating as an organization in all of my business relationships. Now, an organization can be a team of people working towards a common objective too. As my company has gotten bigger, we now have two teams of people which make up two distinct organizations within the company. One is the training team, which I lead, and the other is our operations team, which my director of operations leads. Now, the director of operations happens to be my wife, but she has her own team and people who work for her. This is an example of how people are organized around common goals within a larger business organization to achieve common objectives in a coordinated method. Now, in most of these cases, the common objectives are usually trying to create value for the consumer, but the way value is actually achieved has changed in ITIL 4. Previously, value was considered something that was delivered from a service provider to the consumer of the service, but this wasn't entirely accurate the way it was done in the real world. In fact, it was so inaccurate that sayings like delivering something is easy, but delivering something of value is hard began to spring up all throughout the IT service management industry. So instead, ITIL 4 recognizes that value must be co-created by the service provider and the consumer. Now, what does this mean for us in the real world? Well, let's take this course as an example. My team and I have spent a lot of time preparing this course, filming this course, editing this course, and publishing this course so that you could get value from it. And I truly believe this is the best course that's out there today. And as such, I place a lot of value on the content, and I hope you do as well. But let's look at it from your perspective as the consumer. Is this course truly valuable? Well, you've exchanged some of your hard-earned money to get access to this training, so you probably feel that it has some amount of value or you wouldn't have given me your money to access this course. Now, if you're like most students, you probably are going to measure this based on the fact of seeing if it adequately prepares you to pass the foundation exam. But for you to achieve that desired value, passing the exam, we have to co-create that value together. As the supplier, I've provided you with all the videos, the quizzes, the practice exam, the web servers, access to the training, downloadable PDFs, all of that. But as the consumer, you have to actually watch those videos, study the definitions, practice with the quizzes, take the practice exams. Not to mention, you have to have a laptop, a tablet, or a phone to even access these videos and be able to watch them, as well as a stable, high-speed internet connection. To achieve the desired outcome and value from this course, we both have to work hard and meet our ends of this obligation. That's the idea of co-creation of value by the service provider, me and my team, and you, the consumer. This is how it works inside of ITIL 4. Now, as much as I'd love to be able to simply create the value for you as soon as you make the purchase, we don't have that technology yet to instantly load up the information into your head. This isn't the Matrix after all. Instead, you have to help me to create the value we both want, which is for you to pass your certification exam on the first attempt. As a supplier, I can try really hard to deliver that value, but if you as the consumer don't actually cooperate and turn on the videos and watch them, well, then the value simply won't be created because the value is the outcome. It's you getting that certification done. This is why relationships between organizations, such as the supplier and the consumer, have become very complex. In the simplest form, the provider would deliver a service, the consumer would pay for the service, and the provider then uses that money to create more services while the consumer uses the current service they paid for. Now, if both sides are getting the value they desire from that transaction, then this is mutually beneficial. If the value is not achieved by either of these sides, though, then it's likely that this relationship will soon come to an end, and no more value will emerge from it. Unfortunately, the real world is much more complex than the simple example of value creation I just gave. At any moment, an organization can be a consumer and a provider for multiple services. Let's take my organization, for example. I'm a supplier in relation to you, but I'm also a consumer in my relationship with my web hosting provider. These are just different hats being worn by my organization depending on which perspective we're looking at things from. This means that when my organization is acting as a consumer, we co-create value by consuming services, and when we're acting as a provider, we co-create value by providing services to other organizations and people. Organizations recognize that value is co-created through an active collaboration between providers and consumers, as well as other organizations that are part of the relevant service relationships. These service provider and service consumer roles are the two generic roles that an organization can fulfill. People, though, can fulfill three other types of roles. This is the role of a user, a customer, and a sponsor. The first role is that of a user. A user is simply a person who uses a service. The second role is that of a customer. A customer is the person who defines the requirements for a service and takes responsibility for the outcomes of service consumption. The third role is that of a sponsor. A sponsor is a person who authorizes the budget for service consumption. The term sponsor is also used in some organizations to describe an organization or department or an individual that provides financial or other support for an initiative. While these are the three roles, these roles could be fulfilled by different people, or all three of these roles could be fulfilled by the same person. Let's consider a simple scenario where all three roles are going to be filled by the same person. Maybe it's been a few years and you decided to buy a brand new car. Let's say you're all excited about all the technological improvements that have been made in the world of cars, and you decide to get one that can perform semi-autonomous driving, like a Tesla. As a user, you're really excited to drive your new Tesla because it has so many cool features like the autopilot, the comfortable leather seats, and a really fast electric motor. As a customer, though, you may not see a big difference in the features between a Model S and a Model 3, so you're trying to decide which model best meets your requirements and helps you achieve your outcomes most efficiently when you're consuming the service of this semi-autonomous vehicle. Now, in your third role as a sponsor, you start to weigh the cost of the Model 3 versus the Model S, and you try to determine which one should you budget for in order to meet the needs of your semi-autonomous car that's going to drive you from point A to point B and get you to work each day. Now, all three of these roles have competing interests. The user wants the best features when they consume the service, but they'd probably be happy with either the Model 3 or the Model S. They're both really nice cars, after all. The customer in you actually defines the requirements, though, for your new car. They define that one has to be able to drive semi-autonomously. They want one that can drive at least 200 miles before needing to be refueled or recharged, and other kind of requirements like that. Your third role is that of the sponsor, and this is where things come from a cost perspective. While I might like the Model S, it sells for almost $100,000. Can the Model 3 still meet all of the customer's requirements even though it sells for only $60,000? Well, if so, then the sponsor would rather choose the less expensive option. So whenever you buy yourself a new car, you're really balancing these three roles before you make the decision, and you're doing this all inside your own head. Now, let's consider it a little bit differently. Let's say we're going to buy a car for somebody else. My daughter is almost to the age where she's old enough to drive, and so she's going to be the user in this scenario because she wants her parents to buy her first car for her. She doesn't care how much it costs. She doesn't have any requirements. She just knows that she's going to consume the resource, and she needs to be able to get in and drive from point A to point B. In this case, this means that she can drive wherever she wants, and she'll be able to drive whatever her mother and I decide to buy for her. Now, my wife, on the other hand, is going to be our customer. She's going to set the requirements for this service, the car in our particular example, and this service is going to have to meet those requirements, and she's going to be the one taking responsibility for our daughter's actions when she consumes that service. In this case, when our daughter is driving, my wife's going to be responsible for whatever happens because she's the customer. Now, my wife may create some requirements for this new car. She might say that it has to have 4 seats, that it has to have 4 doors. Maybe it has to have a driver and passenger airbag. The car might have to be less than 10 years old. Whatever the requirements is that she decides, she has that ability because she's the customer. Now, our third role is the sponsor, and this is the person who's going to pay for the initiative. In this case, the one of buying a car for my daughter, I'm going to be the sponsor. I'm going to have to pay for this thing. I have created a budget for this car, let's say no more than $10,000. And that means the customer, my wife, can pick any car that she wants for the user, my daughter, but This car has to be within that budget of $10,000. So I guess my wife isn't going to be able to go out and buy her a brand new car, even though the customer may want that or the user may want that. Instead, the customer has been allocated a specific budget and they have to stay within that. So this is the same type of thing that happens in business all of the time. Sometimes in business, you get to act as 1, 2, or 3 of these roles depending on the scenario. For example, you may define what is needed for your business team, and you may have the authority to allocate and authorize the budget for those requirements, and you're going to be both the customer and sponsor in that case. But your team members are going to be the users because they're going to use what you buy. This is actually a great position to be in because the person authorizing the budget is also the person making the requirements decisions. Unfortunately though, in a lot of large organizations, the person who authorizes the budget for an IT service is not a customer or a user of that service. And this type of disconnect can actually cause problems because the sponsor who funds the requirements and the customer who creates those requirements often have arguments over what those requirements should be. Because the sponsor is focused on the efficiency and cost savings, whereas the customers are focused on the requirements and the users are focused on the usability of this service. This can create a gap between the user and the customer's interests as well. As a service provider, it's our responsibility to recognize these 3 generic roles on a consumer side and to work with them appropriately to ensure the right service is being delivered and supplied to meet those needs. This means we need to ensure that the financials work for the sponsor, that the requirements are met for the customer, and the users get what they expect in usability of our service. At the end of the day, we want to achieve user satisfaction, customer satisfaction, and sponsor satisfaction, because when all 3 come together, we're more likely to have repeat business from the consumer's organization.